Alright folks, Regal came back again, and as it's Wrestlemania weekend, I thought I'd do a wrestling themed top 10. Namely, the top 10 wrestlers to never win the world title. Slightly more obscure than just going for a top 10 Wrestlemania matches, or a top 10 wrestlers, or top 10 champions. But still a good topic, I think. Now, I've been a big wrestling fan since the early 90s, so most of my picks are going to come from then, to be fair. In fact, I think all of them do. Some going slightly before that, some going slightly after it, but that's kind of their main prime. And for this, let's just lay down the ground rules. They've got to have not won the world title in WWF, WWE, WCW, ECW, NWA, or TNA. I'm not counting the Japanese companies because I don't know them well enough. Same with the Mexicans. And they're really the only worldwide world champions that you can count. Sorry to all those British wrestling companies that are really good, really up and coming. You're just not there yet. Also, got to, have retired from wrestling, or essentially retired from wrestling. So, if you've not won it yet, but you're still wrestling, afraid you're not going to win that. And you've got to have been in these companies and actually had a chance of winning them, been given pushes, etc. Again, otherwise I could just name 10 of the greatest British wrestlers of all time because they've never been in the company. So, without further ado, on to the top 10. Okay, we're starting this top 10 with William Regal. He's a really good wrestler. So entertaining. He is such an entertaining wrestler. Both on the mic and in the ring. He can do it all. And he is an incredible performer. You could look back at his time as Lord Steven Regal and see how entertaining he was. Look at him as the commissioner of the NXT and see just how good he still is. And doesn't hurt that he's, my fellow countryman. He's a fellow Brit. And we've not had enough Brits winning world titles in wrestling. I can, in fact, only think of two in recent memory. Magnus, who was trumpeted as the first ever British world champion. And Gary Steele, who won the NWA World Championship a couple of years before. So, yeah, sorry, Magnus. Love you, man. You're awesome. But you weren't the first. Back to William Regal, of course. He would have been given the big push and actually probably won the belt if he hadn't been done for going in for their wellness policy, and being caught doing drugs. Such a shame. He would have been a great world champion. Wouldn't have carried the company, but he would have had a great run as champion. Okay, I was never personally that big a fan of Ravishing Rick Rude. I mean, I could see he had an amazing look, and he really did. And that he could carry himself with a load of personality. But these muscle bounders never really did it for me. He was a great worker, don't get me wrong. In the ring, he was really go. He even got a good match out of Ultimate Warrior, which really takes some doing. And yeah, I get his career was cut a lot shorter than it should have been because of injuries and untimely death. But yeah, I think he would have been a really good world champion. I'm surprised he wasn't the world champion at some point in WCW. Now, his only big real push for the world title came against the Ultimate Warrior after the Warrior had already beaten him for the Intercontinental, which sort of damaged him. But yeah, my main memories of Rick Rude are when his time with DX, and I thought he was really good with them. Not really my thing, but he would have been a worthy champion. He probably should have been a worthy champion. Now, here's somebody who's been seen in the UK quite a lot over the years, especially when I was going to a lot of UK live shows back in the early 2000s. 99 to 2002-ish. Went to a good few wrestling shows then, and Tatanka was on a lot of them. And I really enjoyed seeing him. I really enjoyed his time in the WWF. I really loved his undefeated run that he went on forever. And the way it was sacrificed to Ludwig Borger was epic. I really thought that was epic at the time. And he had some other such great moments, like when he turned on Lex Luger. One of the few times I actually got to care about what happened with Lex Luger. But through it all, and despite having a few title shots here and there, he never won a single belt in the WWF. And I don't recall him ever being in WCW or ECW. Shame. He would have been a really good champion, I think. Anytime I play games like Total Extreme Wrestling or whatever it's called on the PC, I always give Tatanka a good title run, because to me, he deserves it. Okay, Kurt Hennig. Well, let's be fair, we're not calling him Kurt Hennig, we're calling him Mr. Perfect. And there's a reason he got that name. It was such effortless skill he had, both in the ring, on the mic, in the basketball court, pretty much anything he turned his mind to, he was good at. That's why they gave him the gimmick, and it really fitted him. He was so effortless. Really, the name fit perfectly for him. And to be honest with you, with the charisma he had, with the skill he had, I have absolutely no doubt he would have been the world champion at some point if he were wrestling today. A lot of people compare him to Dolph Ziggler. And to be fair, I can see that. But the company got behind Kurt Hennig a lot of the time. Both WCW and WWF. And if they got behind Dolph Ziggler like they did him, they would definitely put him for the world title. And deservedly so. Frankly, for both of them. Oh, now here we are, the master of mind games, the master of psychology. He didn't really have the typical WWF look, which is probably why they never really put him in the main event and never really gave him a title shot. But he is so good in the ring. He's so good with the mind games. I mean, a lot of people compare him to Bray Wyatt, who's around now. And that's fair. That's a good comparison. Though I'd still say Jake the Snake Roberts edged that for sheer popularity, charisma and skill. And nothing against Bray Wyatt. Bray Wyatt, excellent. Never been given the greatest material in the world, but he's still really good. And I think if he'd been given the material Jake the Snake Roberts had, he'd be so good. But truth is, Jake the Snake Roberts has sort of ruined some of his legacy. I know he's clean now, mostly. But there was such a big run of time when he was just not. And it's such a shame because he was so good. And he let his legacy down so much. But again, I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm just saying it's such a shame. Now, when I was finding the names for this list, because I did do a little bit of research here and there, hence Ricky the Dragon Steamboat not being on the list, because he'd won the NWA title. I didn't realise that when I first started it, he was going to feature heavily. But I was shocked to discover Roddy Piper had never won a belt, a world title belt that is, in WWF, WCW or anywhere else. He is such a good wrestler. I couldn't believe he hadn't won it. I mean, he's not the most technically skilled, but he could tell the story in the ring with the best of them. And his skills on the mic are legendary. He was really good on the mic. I mean, what was his famous phrase? I'm here to kick butt and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of bubble gum. That is one of the greatest tough guy lines I've ever heard, frankly. And he has done so much. He's been the IC champion. He's been the US champion. He's boxed Mr. T. He's been in films, good films, which for a 80s and 90s wrestler is incredibly rare. So, yeah, I'm truly shocked that he's qualified for this list. Probably the man on this list that's come closest to winning the world title, and that's the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Because back around Wrestlemania 4 kind of time, he'd bought the title off Andre the Giant, and Andre gave him the belt, but Jack Tunney overturned the decision, so he couldn't buy the title. And then he was actually scheduled to win the world title tournament at Wrestlemania 4 itself. And that decision was reversed, and they decided to give it to Macho Man Randy Savage instead, because Randy Savage had been turned down for winning the Intercontinental title. It was a consolation prize for him, and it meant DiBiase never won the world title. Such a shame as well, because, again, he's so good on the mic, and he's so good in the ring. He really is. He's probably the second best person on this list in the ring, in my opinion, which is really saying something. And he never won the world title because of Honky Tonk Man being Honky Tonk Man. The gimmick of him never winning a title as well also carried over to when he was a manager, because he had so many shots, or his charge does so many shots at so many belts, never won a single one of them. Not until they dumped him or before they joined him. Such a shame as well, because he is so good. He really is so good. Check out his matches if you haven't seen them. Okay, here we are. We're getting into the top 3 now. And once again, we've got one of my fellow countrymen, and we've got the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. He is such a good competitor, is Davey Boy Smith. And let's point out, for 10 years, he sold out the biggest arena that the WWE played at, Wembley Arena, for him headlining against Bret Hart for the Intercontinental title. Now, just that alone means he should have got the big push to the world title. He had a few shots at it here and there, but never could win it. And, of course, he was trained in the UK, big UK star, but then he went over to Calgary and got trained there as well and learnt the Hart style of wrestling, which, again, epic style of wrestling, that. Big thing. He was so good in the ring because of that. And let's be honest here, in the WWF, he's done everything else. He's won every other title he could win. This was the only belt that escaped him. And to be fair, a lot of people don't realise he didn't win it. They thought, oh, he must have done. But no, he never did. He missed out. It's the only thing he missed out on in the WWF. And then he went to WCW and had that injury that eventually led to his death. Such a great shame, because many consider him the greatest English wrestler of all time. Okay, so I've called him Razor Ramon on this list. You might want to call him Scott Hall. You might want to call him the Diamond Stud. You might want to call him a lot of things. But to me, Razor Ramon is where he was at his most epic. For me. Oh, I know a lot of people disagree with that, and that's fine. I don't mind that. But to me, he'll always be the man that won all those Intercontinental titles. And he won a hell of a lot of Intercontinental titles. That's one of the reasons it's so surprising he didn't win the world title. And then, of course, there's that epic ladder match he had with Shawn Michaels. There's been 2 of them, but I'm referring to the first here. Because, hey, that was the first time we had a ladder match on a mainstream company. And it was epic. And that, half of that at least, goes to Scott Hall, Razor Ramon. And this is without even mentioning the fact that he was the co-founder of the NWO. Arguably the hottest wrestling gimmick of the 90s. Okay, maybe Steve Austin would argue against that, but hey, this was such a hot thing in the 90s. That's why so many people are shocked when they find out he never actually got the push up to the world title. He never got past that mid-card belt. So many people are shocked at that. To be fair, I'm shocked at that. I mean, I'd have given him at least one big push. Even after he fell into the big bad drink and drugs thing and became I can't even speak. When he became Last Call Scott Hall, which was an awful gimmick. That was an awful gimmick. That really tarnished his reputation. Really tarnished him in the ring as well. Okay. Anyone who knows me as a wrestling fan knows that Owen Hart is my favourite wrestler of all time. And probably thinks I put this list together just so I could name him number one. And to be fair, they're probably right. But let's look at this objectively. That in the ring, he was a better wrestler than Bret Hart. On the mic, he was better than Bret Hart. And Bret Hart is still seen as one of the greatest of all time. Owen just never got the big push, because I think Vince didn't really see him as the world champion. He saw him sort of as a man to beat, not the man to beat. Sort of a Chris Jericho-like role. And to be fair, from what I've read about Chris Jericho will be quite pleased to being compared to Owen. So we've got one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, who's delivered some of the greatest wrestling matches of all time, who could cut a great promo, but Vince just didn't think he was the world championship material. Daniel Bryan. And then, of course, the thing that makes him immortal even more so, and this even worse, that he never won the belt, the tragedy of his death, which just was appalling. It was a great tragedy. I'm not blaming the WWF for that. Take note, I am not blaming them. I'm merely pointing out how much of a tragedy it was. And we lost one of the greatest wrestlers of all time, one of the greatest showmen of all time that day. And he really should have been a world champion at some point.